February 4th, 2016, Dhaka, Bangladesh. A Thursday night. The offices of Bangladesh Bank are empty. Cleaning staff move through fluorescent corridors. The governor is asleep. The finance minister is asleep. Everyone with the authority to stop what is about to happen is asleep. At 8:36 p.m., the first instruction leaves. It is a swift message, formatted correctly, authenticated correctly, sent from inside Bangladesh Bank's own network using Bangladesh Bank's own credentials, to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where Bangladesh keeps nearly $1 billion in reserve. The instruction is simple. Move money. 35 separate transfer requests, nearly $1 billion. Destinations: Sri Lanka, the Philippines, Pan-Pacific accounts the Bangladesh Central Bank has never heard of. The Fed receives the messages, processes them, begins moving funds. By the time anyone in Dhaka realizes what has happened, $81 million is already gone. Not stolen at gunpoint, not taken in a raid, transferred, quietly, correctly. Through the exact system the world's banks use to trust each other, and the people who sent those instructions were not in Bangladesh at all. Here is what makes this different from every other bank robbery in history. The thieves never touched a vault. They never forged a signature. They sat at computers in another country, spoke the bank's own language fluently, and asked politely. The system said yes. Who builds a weapon that can hollow out a central bank from across the planet? And how does $81 million vanish into a casino cage in Manila before a single alarm goes off? To understand what hit Bangladesh Bank, you have to understand what SWIFT is and why the people who broke it understood it better than the people who built it. SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, founded 1973. Headquarters outside Brussels, used by over 11,000 financial institutions in more than 200 countries. It is not a bank. It does not hold money. It is a messaging system, a language banks use to tell each other what to do with money. When Bangladesh Bank sends a SWIFT message to the New York Fed, the Fed does not call Dhaka to confirm. The message is the confirmation. Authentication is built into the format. Trust is built into the architecture. The whole system runs on the assumption that if the message looks right and the credentials check out, the instruction is legitimate. That assumption is the weapon. The group that used it had been studying the assumption for years. Later investigations, led by Mandiant, BAE Systems, and eventually the FBI, would trace the attack backward through a chain of infrastructure, malware signatures, and operational patterns to a single source. A unit operating out of North Korea. Lazarus Group. Not a name they gave themselves, a name analysts gave them after finding the same digital fingerprints across a decade of operations. The 2014 Sony Pictures hack, the WannaCry ransomware attack that crippled hospitals across Britain in 2017, attacks on South Korean financial institutions, attacks on cryptocurrency exchanges, one group, one consistent signature, different targets, different methods, same underlying logic. The state needs hard currency. Sanctions have cut off the usual channels, so the state builds a unit whose job is to steal it from the international financial system, one operation at a time. Lazarus Group is not a criminal gang that happened to work for a government. It is a government department that operates like a criminal gang. The distinction matters because it explains the patience. A criminal gang needs money now. A state unit plans on a different timeline. They can spend a year inside a network before they take anything. They can map every system, test every credential, understand every procedure, and wait. The Bangladesh operation was not improvised, it was rehearsed. The entry point was an email. Months before February 2016, someone at Bangladesh Bank received a job application, a PDF attachment, standard formatting, convincing enough to open. Inside the PDF, malware, quiet, patient, invisible to the bank's security software. It sat inside the network and watched. It read traffic. It studied the SWIFT system. It learned the format of legitimate transfer requests, the timing patterns of when transfers were sent, the specific language Bangladesh Bank used when communicating with New York. It was not stealing yet. It was studying, learning to impersonate. By the time the operators were ready to move, they could write a Bangladesh Bank SWIFT message that Bangladesh Bank could not distinguish from its own. That is not a hack. That is fluency. The timing was not an accident. February 4th is a Thursday in Bangladesh. The following day, Friday, is the start of the weekend in Bangladesh. The country observes Friday-Saturday as its rest days. The New York Fed operates Monday through Friday Eastern Time. The Philippines, where most of the money was headed, observes Saturday-Sunday.
Let's review the final numbers from last month.
The attackers chose a window where Bangladesh would be closed before anyone noticed. New York would process the transfers on a normal business day without suspicion, and the Philippines would receive the funds on a Friday before local banks closed for the weekend. 3 different time zones, 3 different weekend schedules, aligned into a gap of roughly 72 hours where the money could move, settle, and disappear before any single institution could reach another one to stop it. They sent 35 transfer requests totaling $951 million. Most were blocked, not by a security system, by a spelling mistake. One transfer was destined for the Shalika Foundation, a Sri Lankan non-profit being used as a cover. An operator typed "foundation" instead of "foundation." Deutsche Bank, routing the transfer through Frankfurt, flagged the spelling error and contacted Bangladesh Bank for clarification. By the time Dhaka responded, other flags had been raised. The New York Fed had already grown suspicious of the volume and destinations and halted most of the remaining transfers, but 5 had already cleared. $81 million. Sent to 4 accounts at Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in Manila. The accounts had been opened months earlier under false identities by people who had since vanished. The money landed on a Thursday evening Philippine time. The next morning, Friday, it was withdrawn in cash and moved to a foreign exchange broker named Philrem. Philrem converted it and delivered it physically to 2 casinos in Manila, Midas Hotel and Casino, Eastern Hawaii Leisure Company, casino chips, cash in, cash out, the financial equivalent of running wire transfers through a shredder. Philippine casinos at the time were not subject to the same anti-money laundering regulations as banks. The money entered as gambling funds and exited as clean cash, distributed to multiple individuals who dispersed across Southeast Asia before the weekend was over. By Sunday, when Bangladesh Bank finally reached the New York Fed and the scale of what had happened became clear, the trail ended at a casino cage in Manila. $81 million, gone in the space of a long weekend. The investigation that followed moved in 2 directions simultaneously and found completely different things at each end. In the Philippines, A Senate inquiry dragged casino owners, bank executives, and money brokers in front of cameras. A Chinese-Filipino businessman named Kim Wong, who had received a significant portion of the funds through one of the casinos, appeared before the Senate and handed back $4.68 million in cash, physically in boxes, at the hearing. He claimed he was cooperating. The rest of the money had already moved too far to recover. A Rizal Bank branch manager was charged. Several individuals were prosecuted, but the money was largely gone, and the people who orchestrated the movement of it were untouchable because they were not in the Philippines. In the other direction, deeper into the malware, the forensics teams were building a different picture. Investigators found that the malware used in the Bangladesh attack shared code with malware used in the Sony hack in 2014. Same obfuscation techniques, same compilation methods, same artifacts in the binary. Not similar. The same. BAE Systems published their analysis in April 2016. The malware had been designed to interact directly with Alliance software, the specific software Bangladesh Bank used to interface with SWIFT. The attackers had targeted that software specifically. They had written code that deleted transaction records from the bank's local system after transfers were sent, so that even the bank's own logs would not show what had been done until it was too late. This was not opportunistic. Someone had obtained a copy of the Alliance software and spent time learning exactly how to manipulate it without triggering alerts. That requires either access to the software through legitimate channels, which are tightly controlled, or a prior operation to obtain it. The Bangladesh attack was not the first attempt. Investigators found evidence of reconnaissance attacks against other central banks using similar methods. Vietnam's Tien Phong Bank was targeted months earlier. The attackers failed there.
Let's review the final.
Bangladesh worked. SWIFT itself came under scrutiny it had never faced before. The organization had always positioned its messaging network as separate from any bank's internal security. If a bank was compromised, that was the bank's problem. But the Bangladesh attack revealed that the two could not be cleanly separated. If an attacker could sit inside a bank's network, learn its credentials, and send authenticated SWIFT messages on its behalf, then the trust architecture of the entire network was only as strong as the weakest member's internal security. Bangladesh Bank was running its SWIFT system on a second-hand router that had never been updated. No firewall between the SWIFT interface and the rest of the bank's internal network. The attackers had moved from a phishing email to the SWIFT terminal without crossing a single security barrier. SWIFT issued guidance. Updated security requirements began auditing member banks. 30 banks across the world subsequently disclosed they had also been targeted by similar attacks using similar methods. Most had not reported it. The embarrassment of admitting the breach was worse, in institutional terms, than the breach itself. In September 2018, the United States Department of Justice unsealed an indictment. One name, Park Jin-hyuk, North Korean national, alleged member of a government-sponsored hacking organization, charged with conspiracy to commit computer fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. 3 operations listed in the indictment: the Sony hack, WannaCry, the Bangladesh Bank heist. Park Jin-hyuk had worked for a North Korean government front company called Chosun Expo Joint Venture, which operated offices in China and presented itself as a legitimate software development firm. His email accounts, online aliases,
Let's review
and
the final
technical
numbers from last
infrastructure
month. We
were
need to
traced
increase our
across
output here.
multiple
I will handle that.
operations.
We can definitely.
The same accounts used in preparation for the Bangladesh attack had been used in preparation for the Sony attack. The same VPN infrastructure, the same behavioral patterns. He was not in custody. He was in North Korea. The indictment was, in practical terms, a document that explained what had happened and named who did it, and acknowledged that no one could be prosecuted for it. North Korea does not extradite. North Korea does not respond to American indictments. The charges existed on paper inside a system that had no jurisdiction over the people named in them. Pyongyang denied everything, called the attribution fabricated. State media described the accusations as part of a political campaign against the North Korean government. This is the standard response, and it costs nothing because the cost of telling the truth would be infinite. What the indictment did produce was a complete picture of the logic behind the operation. By 2016, North Korea was operating under some of the most severe international sanctions ever imposed on a state. The country needed hard currency, dollars, euros, assets convertible to real purchasing power, to fund its weapons programs, to pay its elites, to maintain the architecture of control that keeps the regime in place. Legitimate trade was nearly impossible. The traditional method of earning hard currency through arms sales to sanctioned regimes was increasingly monitored, so the state invested in a different kind of weapon. Keyboards, coders, patience. Estimates of Lazarus Group's total theft across all operations exceed $2 billion. Some analysts place it higher. Cryptocurrency exchanges hit across Asia. Ransomware deployed against
review the final
hospitals,
numbers from-
corporations, government systems. Each operation calibrated to
final
extract
numbers from last
value from the international financial system that sanctions were designed to deny them. The sanctions said, "You cannot access the global economy." Lazarus Group answered, "Watch us." Bangladesh recovered $15 million of the $81 million through legal proceedings against Rizal Bank. The rest is gone. The governor of Bangladesh Bank resigned. The bank's finance minister publicly called the Fed negligent. The Fed said it had followed its procedures. Both statements were true simultaneously. SWIFT spent the following years rebuilding its customer security program from the ground up. The organization that had positioned itself as infrastructure, neutral, technical, above the problems of individual banks, discovered it was as exposed as its weakest member. When that member is a central bank and the attacker is a nation-state with a decade of patience and a government budget behind it, the infrastructure is not secure. It is a target. The Filipino Senate proceedings recovered almost nothing. Kim Wong kept returning to hearings and producing small amounts of cash and large amounts of testimony that went nowhere. The branch manager who had opened the accounts was convicted. The architects of the operation were in Pyongyang. Here is what should stay with you. The Bangladesh bank heist was not a failure of technology. The technology worked exactly as designed. Authentication confirmed. Transfer executed. Records cleared. Every system performed its function. The failure was the assumption underneath all of it. The assumption that the person sending the message is who the message says they are. That assumption holds for decades. It holds across 11,000 institutions and trillions of dollars of daily transfers. It holds until someone spends a year inside a network studying it. Then it does not hold at all. North Korea needed money. The international system had a seam. One group found the seam
Let's review
and
the
pulled
final
it
numbers
open
from-
for $81 million in a single long weekend. The money funded missiles. The missiles are still being built. Go back to the beginning. February 4th, 2016, a Thursday night, empty offices, a cleaning crew, a governor asleep. 35 messages, formatted correctly, authenticated correctly, sent from inside the bank's own system. The Fed received them and said yes. By the time anyone said no, the weekend had already done its work. The vault was never touched. There was no vault. There was only a message, and a system that had no way to tell the difference between the real one and the one that had been watching it for a year, learning to sound exactly like it.